Welcome to this week's deep dive video. Last Sunday we talked about the end of David's life, and in there we talked about the importance of taking care of the things you know you should do today, taking care of them today, because tomorrow might be too late and you're not even guaranteed a tomorrow. David had waited far too long to announce his successor. He had caused all sorts of problems in his family. Trying not to actually cause problems, he caused many more problems. He was trying not to stir things up. He didn't want to upset Adonijah. Scripture says there that he didn't want, he never said anything that would upset Adonijah. And what it did is it led him to think that this was likely the direction that his life was going to go. Adonijah thought, I will be king, and he was taking steps to get this done. And Solomon and Bathsheba, they also thought Adonijah was going to be king. And though that was not what they had been promised or what was right, they thought that this is what's going to happen. And Nathan steps in and helps them get things set straight and kind of holds David to account. He says, David, these were the things you said you were going to do. These were the things you said should happen, but that's not what's actually happened. What's going on, David? So we talked about all those things, but I wanted to look for this deep dive at the consequences of David waiting so long. Solomon's life was spared, but there were still consequences. Solomon became king. His promise, David's promise to Solomon and Bathsheba, was fulfilled, but there were still consequences for David waiting so long to do what needed to be done. And there is an urgency that life demands. If you're breathing, there is likely something you should be doing, much to a point of frustration. I'm sure you found yourself like myself where there's not enough time in the day sometimes. But you see, for David, this was not a matter of not enough time in the day. This goes back to the same problem he had with Bathsheba, the same root sin, if you will, here, where he wasn't doing what needed to be done when he could do it. And he found himself later in a precarious spot. With Bathsheba, he found himself with time to lust after her and found himself falling into sin and harming her. And here we see with Bathsheba again, he had time to do what needed to be done but failed to do it. And now he's at a place where he's struggling to do anything. So let's look at what happened. In 1 Kings chapter 2, we see that Solomon has been made king. David has given Solomon some instruction like, hey, you're coming in as king. Here's some things, some business I wasn't able to finish, some things that are going to be expected of you. Here's some advice from father to son, previous king to future king or current king. Here's some things you should take care of. And so David's given him his closing advice, and it's starting in verse 10 of chapter 2. Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. He had reigned for 40 years over Israel, 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father, and his rule was firmly established. So Solomon has been set in place. There's not a contest to his rule. He is the king, but there's still a problem. There is still a problem lurking. In verse 13, it says, Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. Bathsheba asked him, do you come peacefully? You see this. This is not a normal visit. Right off the bat, we have a clue. This is not a normal visit. Bathsheba is concerned. He answered, yes, peacefully. Then he added, I have something to say to you. You may say it, she replied. So Adonijah has come to Bathsheba, the mother of the king, with a request. This person who stood in opposition not long ago has come to ask something of her. So we see the character of Bathsheba as an incredible lady who is willing to be graceful and merciful to this young man here, but also you see some of the character of Adonijah who would dare to come ask something from an enemy of his, someone who he was not going to show any mercy or respect to. He is coming to ask something of them. You see, Adonijah is kind of a snake in this passage. So she gives him permission to ask, and he says in verse 15, as you know, he said, the kingdom was mine. All Israel looked to me as their king. But things changed, and the kingdom has gone to my brother, for it has come to him from the Lord. Now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me. You may make it, she said. Now, look at how he asks. Have you ever talked to somebody that's like this? They say something, but they're really saying something else. As you know, he said, the kingdom was mine. All Israel knew I was king. Everybody knew it. This was really what was supposed to happen. But the Lord intervened. Solomon's now king. Everybody else knew I was supposed to be king, but the Lord intervened. So who am I to question the Lord? He's got this false concession attitude. And you can kind of see the heart of what's happening here. So she gives him permission to make the request. And it says, so he continued in verse 17, please ask King Solomon, he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife. Now remember, who was Abishag? She was the lady who was there with the King David. When he was not able to keep himself warm, she was the lady found to keep David warm. This was the lady that was picked to care for King David. So Adonijah is asking for Abishag as his wife. Very well, Bathsheba replied, I will speak to the king for you. He knows that Adonijah knows Solomon will listen to his mom, that she has a good standing with him, and so he's kind of taking advantage of this. He's playing his mom against Solomon. Adonijah is playing Solomon's mom against him. Very well, Bathsheba replied, I will speak to the king for you. When Bathsheba went to the king Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah, the king stood up to meet her, bowed down to her, and sat down on his throne. He had a throne brought in for the king's mother, and she sat down at his right hand. You see, Solomon loves his mom. This is an awesome picture of respect for his mom. She says, I have one small request to make of you. Do not refuse me. And the king replied, make it, my mother. I will not refuse you. So again, this picture of respect. Here's a son who loves his mom. He's excited to see her. He treats her with respect. He welcomes her in. He has a throne brought for her. She's being treated as royalty. She is being elevated above those in the room, brought to his level. This is something amazing. And she says, I have one small request to make of you. Now he's thinking the mom is making this request for her, of her son, but that's not what's really happening here. So she said, let Abishag the Shunammite be given in marriage to your brother Adonijah. King Solomon answered his mother, why do you request Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him. After all, he is my older brother. Yes, for him and for Abiathar the priest and Joab, son of Zeruiah. So can you imagine this betrayal, this honest questioning of, Mom, why are you doing this? If I give him this is the equivalent of giving Adonijah one of David's wives. This is an acknowledgement of Adonijah's rightful place as the king. Though we don't have something like this in our society today, this is if Adonijah were to get one of David's wives, or this lady who was set aside for David, it would be a further part of his claim to the throne. This Adonijah who is still plotting against Solomon. Now, Solomon has already spared Adonijah under the pretense that Adonijah was going to be an honorable man. But here we see that Adonijah is trying to use Solomon's mom against him, trying to use someone that Solomon loves and respects against him. So here we learn the importance of being good to those we love, right? So Bathsheba was trying to help Adonijah. She was trying to be merciful and gracious. But in this, she didn't look to how this would affect her son, the one whom she actually loves. You see, Bathsheba, I think she's taking the high road here, but she's actually playing against her son. The one who loves her and respects her enough to have her recognized and elevated as royalty in this throne room. We see that same son she is actively working against, but she hasn't paused to weigh what's happening. Jesus tells us to be gentle as doves and wise as serpents. And if she had been gentle with Adonijah, but taken time to weigh the words of Adonijah, as those who believe the gospel, as those who follow Christ, we understand that Christ can change people. But we also have to take time and be wise in assessing that change, right? We have to be wise with how we treat those who did have a past. So if we know someone is a bank robber and they've repented, they've come to the Lord and all this stuff, probably not the best treasurer for the church because they have a history of not doing well with money, taking something that's not theirs. And I'm not saying their repentance wasn't real, their forgiveness isn't real. I'm not saying any of that. But it's not a fair thing to give somebody their temptation as their duty, right? In the same way, we would not take someone who struggles with alcohol, and if your church does real wine for communion, you're probably not going to have them be the one pouring the wine out and dispensing that for communion, right? Because that's not a fair temptation. That's not a loving or kind thing. Here, Adonijah has come to Bathsheba, and Bathsheba's trying to be kind to Adonijah, but she's not weighing what's really being asked. This guy that was supposed to be living as a respectable man is turned against Solomon. So then King Solomon swore to the Lord, verse 23, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if Adonijah does not pay with his life for this request. And now, as surely as the Lord lives, he who has established me securely on the throne of my father David, and has founded a dynasty for me, as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today. So King Solomon gave orders to Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he struck down Adonijah, and he died. Man, I've had some family drama in my life. Nothing like this. Nothing like this. You see, we learn, again, you got to be wise. Gentle but wise, right? That's how we should walk. Gentle but wise. But all of this stems back to David. If David had taken care of this earlier, if David had been willing to upset Adonijah a little early on, he could have cut all this off before it ever became a problem. But because David was not willing to rock the boat in his family a little, one of his other sons, he's already lost Absalom, because he wouldn't take care of business when he needed to. But here we see, even after his death, one of his sons is put to death at the command of his son Solomon. Not because Solomon was bad, and even Adonijah, though he is responsible for his actions, I can't imagine living your life with the expectation of something happening. Being the one to inherit the throne, having your father allow you to believe that, but then having your father turn and act on some other promise that he had never worked to put in place beforehand, I'm sure Adonijah was incredibly betrayed. So Adonijah is responsible for his actions, definitely responsible for scheming against Solomon, definitely responsible for breaking his own promises and his own oaths, but this comes back to the root with David. If David had done what he knew needed to be done early on, none of these things would have been a problem. Solomon would have been able to live with his brothers in unity. Adonijah would have been left alive. And we would not have had a mother used against her son. So I encourage you again, as we look back at 1 Kings 2 here, let's make sure we're taking care of things that need to be done. Let's endure some awkwardness, some difficult conversations, the boat being rocked, even some tension or strong disagreements in our family. Let's endure those now so that years down the road, our family's not reaping the consequences of our inaction, that our friends aren't reaping the consequence of our inaction, that our coworkers aren't reaping the consequence of our inaction, because though they're responsible for their lives, we don't want to be the root of the mess like David was. I pray that you have a great week, and I pray that you're able to join us this Sunday as we kick off our next series, where we're going to be talking about the different parts of worship in our service, where we talk about why we do the things we do and why Sunday morning looks like it looks like. So I hope to see you there. I hope again that you're having a great week. I'll be praying for you, and I hope to see you Sunday.